When you think about ancient Greece, you think about Spartans, Greek gods, and philosophers who spent all day alone, so you'd think they'd know nothing about actually talking to people, except that's exactly why they're the best at it, because the only way to become important back then was the words you say and how you speak. And there was one man in ancient Greek history who figured out a method so powerful, he used it to turn enemies into allies, become one of the best speakers in the world. And I'm going to break down who he was, his exact method, and how you can actually use this to never run out of things to say again. It was 470 BC when the ugliest man in Athens, Greece was born, Socrates. And by the time he was 30, people thought he was a complete nobody. No money, no status, no looks, but he had one thing nobody else did. He knew how to make people talk. And by 40 years old, the most powerful men in Greece, generals, politicians, aristocrats, were all fighting to spend time with him. And this is where we get into his method. Around 420 BC, Socrates started doing something very specific whenever someone talked to him. He would lock onto one small detail they mentioned and just pull it. A merchant mentions fish briefly. Socrates asks, "How do you judge quality?" The merchant talks for an hour after what he told everyone Socrates was the most interesting man he'd ever met, when Socrates had barely even spoken. And this is what he called the elenchus, the pull. Most people in the conversation are scanning for their next line. Socrates was doing the opposite. He was listening for the one word the other person said with slightly more energy. That's the thread, and he'd pull it. But here's the part that made it deadly. After the merchant answered, Socrates didn't say interesting and move on. He took the exact last thing the merchant said and made it the next question. The merchant says, "I judge by the smell." And Socrates says, "And where did you learn that?" And the merchant says, "My father taught me." And Socrates says, "And did your father fish or trade?" Now the merchant is talking about his father, his childhood, his whole life. And he didn't plan any of those questions in advance, he was just taking the last word and pulling it. And finally, step 3, how you can actually use this, because the worst time I'd ever frozen a conversation was when I was 18 years old and I'd just taken this girl to dinner near my house on the first date I'd ever been on. And about 10 minutes into the date, all the small talk I had run out. And I had absolutely nothing inside my mind to say or even think of. And I remember just staring at my phone, swiping, opening the weather app, pretending to do something, and then forcing out some line about her family or the weather or what sports she played, and the conversation was completely dead. And it was the worst 30 minutes of my life. She left early and she never actually texted me back, and I thought I was just one of those people who was bad at conversation. But when I finally broke it down like Socrates did, I wasn't running out of things to say, I was just focused on the wrong thing. I was in my own head, trying to think of something interesting to say about myself, instead of just pulling the thread from her. If I had just taken one thing she said and asked one question about it, then taken her answer and asked another, I would have never run out of things to say, because she was sitting right there with the whole life I knew nothing about. And that's the thread pull, and once you actually use it, you'll never stare at your phone on a date again. And thank you for watching, and if you did enjoy, please subscribe so more people can see this. Thank you.